I'm so happy tonight to introduce Katharine Van Arsdale Bell, the archivist and special collections librarian at Pacific Union College in Anguin. Before coming to Napa County, Katharine worked for several years as a research librarian in Washington, D.C. Using her MA in history and MSLS in library science from the Catholic University of America, Katharine especially enjoys researching local history and bringing it to life. With that, I'm going to mute myself and let Katharine unmute herself and take it away.
Thank you so much, Elena. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. And I'm really excited to talk about this book because this is a topic I have been immersed in since 2015 when I first moved to Napa Valley. I came from Washington, D.C. by way of Minnesota, and I dropped right into a beautiful part of the country with wonderful history. And I have been learning about it ever since I arrived. I am so grateful to work at Pacific Union College, where we have a beautiful collection of over 20,000 photographs. And so you can imagine, what do you do with 20,000 plus photographs that document the history of not only Anguin, but also Howell Mountain and the areas surrounding the place that Pacific Union College is located in? So this is why I got into the field that I did, to work with collections, to work with local history. And this is what we've been able to do. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit today. Before I get into some pictures, I want to talk about how we created this book. And I say we because I want to thank a few people up top. I want to thank Dr. Eric Anderson, who is part of the history department at Pacific Union College. He's worn a lot of hats. I want to thank him for being my colleague in this process. I want to thank everyone in the administration at Pacific Union College for being a part of the support for the special collections and the archives, for everything they've done to support the collections that we have. And I specifically want to thank everyone who has donated their collections, their personal objects, photographs, letters, whatever they owned that was part of their life story or their family's story that they have donated to Pacific Union College. So that is my big thank you right off the top. I want to talk about how the book was created. I want to tell you about this school and this collection. So obviously Pacific Union College has been in Anguin since 1909. And this is a long history on this mountain. But the history of people living on the mountain, Howell Mountain, it goes far beyond Pacific Union College. We are lucky because the fact that we've been here since 1909 means that the college has collected the history of people who have lived here for a long time. But there are connections beyond the college. We have the hospital just a little bit down the road. We have Santolina Hospital, which began in 1878 as the Rural Health Retreat, which is a history of a hospital and a sort of rural sort of place you could go, a sanitarium. And we have the history of different resorts on the mountain that have dated back before the college came to Anguin. So we have the history of the college and we have the history of the town of Anguin. We have the history of places beyond that. So this is what I'm thinking about when I think about the history of this place. I'm a little nervous, so I'm going to go back to my notes. I want to talk about Edwin and Elvira Anguin. They came to this place in 1874. Edwin and Elvira Anguin purchased 250 acres of what they called the best part of a Spanish land grant here on the top of Howell Mountain. In this place, they established what they wanted to just be a ranch. They just wanted to live here. Edwin Angwin had come from Cornwall about 10 years before. He and his brothers came as immigrants. They wanted to make the American dream their own. And they came to California. They had worked for the railroad system prior to coming to Howell Mountain. And they were just living the American dream. Edwin Angwin wanted, though, to purchase a piece of the land. When he bought a piece of land, he bought it from the grandson of George Yount. And this is the man who established Yountville. He had received the land that Howell Mountain is a part of as a land grant from the Spanish government because he had been a part of Mexican California. This is the man who established Yountville. We don't think about him as a part of the history of Howell Mountain, but he was. He specifically wanted this piece of land because he knew the value of the trees and the land that was here. He wanted to make it a part of what he was working with as he established Napa Valley as one of the first pioneers of this place. So when we are looking at the history of Anguin, we are looking at the history of a place that is named for a Cornish immigrant who came with his wife and established a ranch here. But it is the history of what came before Anguin. And this is why when I think about the history of this place, I think about beyond just Anguin. I think about the mountain itself. And I wanted to tell a story in this book that would be beyond just Anguin, beyond just the people for whom the places are named. What can we learn about this place? I wanted to think about what is the story and how can we tell it in a way that people will be intrigued and learn something new. So I went to the collections that Pacific Union College has. We have over 20,000 photographs, and they have been digitized a little bit. We're working a little bit to digitize the photographs. As early as 2015, people were asking me, can we do a book that uses the photographs from the collections at Pacific Union College? Because we knew there must be a history of this place embedded in the collections at PUC. And I found that there absolutely was. One of the wonderful things about the collections that we used to inform this book is that it's not just the history of the college, it's the history of people associated with the college, those who have lived here and worked here and been a part of not just Anguin, but also the associated industries, agriculture and education, both. So I decided we should certainly attempt to do a book. I felt that the story of Howell Mountain and Anguin should be told together. And this is because this is a town that is built around a location where Edwin Anguin had a resort. It is a place where Pacific Union College is now, but it is also a place that has a history longer than just these founders. So when I wrote this book and when I pulled together photographs from the Pacific Union College archives to tell the story, I wanted to go back before just the colonizers, just those who came later and put their imprint and in fact put their name on the land. Who lived here before? So that was sort of my framing device as I approached this book. I wanted to look at who has lived here throughout as much history as we can approach. What can we find? Who do we know? And so I wanted to start with the Wapo people who came before the Spanish explorers came to Napa Valley. And I wanted to talk about the Spanish explorers and how they impacted the valley. And I wanted to talk about Yount and his land grant that he was given that included Howell Mountain because he cared about it, and lead from there into Edwin, Anguin, and those who came beyond. So that's where we started. And I had some students at Pacific Union College who helped me with this work. I had a lot of wonderful photographs to work with. And I just wanted to tell a version of this story that encompassed as many people as possible. Part of that includes not just looking at the town of Anguin. And that's why the book is called Anguin and Howell Mountain. And some of you probably already have a copy in your hands. You've probably already seen it. You probably looked at some pages within a copy. If you go to the book mine, you can buy a copy. If you go on Arcadia Publishing's website, you can look at the first 30 or so pages. So you can see that the story of this mountain is not just the town of Anguin. It's not just the area around the hospital, which we now call Santolina Hospital, but has gone by the names of the sanitarium or the rural health retreat. The town there has been called Crystal Springs. It has been called Deer Park. It's not just a story of one community on this mountain. It is a story of multiple communities and generations of people who have lived here. So that was my idea when I approached this story. And I wanted to tell it using photographs from Pacific Union College's archives, because the photographs that we have been given by people who have lived here over time. Some of them have gone to PUC, some have attended, and some are just people who have lived here. And so we have a collection that tells a story much broader than just Anguin. I think it encompasses the mountain. So I would like to read for you the introduction to this book. And then I'd like to show you some photographs so that we can talk about some of my favorite stories that I kind of uncovered as I was researching and as I was selecting photographs to include, or photographs that I would like to have included. I will show you some of those. Here's the introduction. The world has heard of Napa Valley. Famous for sweeping vineyard views, lush gardens, and fine wines, the valley hosts almost 4 million visitors a year. But these are indeed visitors to the valley, and that is where their attention often lies. It is a rare thing to catch one looking up. When a visitor does look upward, the mountains greet them. Napa Valley is bracketed by the Mayacamas in the west and the Howells and Vacas in the east. Silverado Trail invites the visitor to wander up the valley ever northward, leaving Napa, Yountville, and Rutherford behind. If one travels along the eastern foothills, the trail will reach a crossing outside Santolina. This is the road to Howell Mountain. It is a curious name, Howell Mountain of the Howell Mountains. It earned this title from one of the first settlers on its slopes, John Howell. He once traveled with the Donner Party before the snows fell, and he came to California in 1846. A man of many talents, he built several cabins on the mountain. Out of one, Howell operated a blacksmith shop that served the residents of Santolina. He must have been important because somewhere along the way, his name and the mountain came together and it stuck. If few people know about John Howell, it may be because for most historians of Napa Valley, Howell Mountain rarely merits a mention. This is surprising, and not just because of the eccentric man who gave the place its name. It is strange because the history of Howell Mountain is as old as Napa Valley and older even than the grapes. John Howell built one of his cabins on a slope overlooking Glass Mountain and the future site of Elmshaven, a National Historic Landmark. However, long before any landmarks or Howell himself, Glass Mountain's rich obsidian deposits drew other people to this place. These were the Wapo, an indigenous tribe that populated Napa Valley before the Europeans came. One of their permanent villages, Simamona, was just north and west of Howell Mountain, and the Wapo ranged from that settlement far and wide. From valley to summit, they left footpaths, grinding stones, arrowheads, and campsites on Howell Mountain and many other places now known by other names. When explorers came to the valley, the first to settle down and stay was George C. Yount. He called Napa the paradise in which he wished to live and die. He made good on this wish by earning 2 Mexican land grants in his life. The first, Rancho Camus, gave him a portion of the valley floor, where he would eventually found the town of Yountville. For the second, Rancho La Joda, he asked for Howell Mountain. The mountain proved to be a paradise too, but perhaps one that drew the eye of a wilder bunch of pioneers who longed to live just a little closer to the sky. Their names are half remembered. Some we know, like John Morris, Edwin Anguin, Elvira Anguin, Charles Krug, Adolphe Brun, and Jean Shea. They found the mountain unforgettable. Its rich soil, plentiful springs, and unique Mediterranean climate provided the perfect environment for cultivation of every kind. Their plum trees, berry patches, pumpkins, and yes, wine grapes grew in such abundance that some, like John Morris, became positively wealthy by selling the excess. Warm days, cool nights, and clear air attracted health seekers. Merritt Kellogg was one of the first to arrive when he established the rural health retreat near Crystal Springs in 1878. Many others followed him. Soon, the mountain boasted half a dozen rustic resorts that offered an escape to nature for the Bay Area rich. One successful hotelier was Edwin Anguin, who opened his resort in the 1880s, and he gave the town of Anguin his name. The beauty of Anguin's resort drew repeat visitors year after year. When the author Ambrose Bierce spent several months at Anguin's, he was entranced. He said, "The weather up here is paradisiacal." He was saying it was like paradise. I don't know how to pronounce the word he wrote. He wrote this in 1893, on an afternoon in January, no less. In a March letter, he claimed, "The fog is of a superior opacity, quite peerless in that way." By April, he was telling his friend, "We are blessed with the most amicable of all conceivable weathers up here, and the wildflowers are putting up their heads everywhere to look for you." Strolling across plowed fields and wading in the creeks, he often found arrowheads. Another famous writer was likewise charmed by the location. Arne Bontemps, later a significant writer in the Harlem Renaissance, attended the college established at the site of Anguin's resort. When he graduated in 1823, he gifted his speech professor with a handwritten poem entitled "Dogwoods at the Spring," parentheses, Howell Mountain, in which he imagined himself as a prodigal son. The lines go, "I shall return when dogwood flowers are going, knowing the old unanswered question on your mouth." He wrote, "The frost would be on the manzanita shoots, and dogwoods at the spring would be turning brown in his moment of autumnal reflection about mortality." This school Bontemps attended, which is Pacific Union College. It came to the mountain in 1909. It became the heart of the tiny town of Anguin, drawing some students for a season and others for a lifetime. The first graduate recalled her time there some 50 years later, saying, "The sun did not always shine in Anguin." There are those who maintain, some nowadays, that it never rains as it did then. But in between the burning sun and the pelting rain, there were days so perfect that the Anguin bread will be lonely for them wherever they go. It seems she wrote from personal experience. A theme develops across the history of Howell Mountain and the memories its inhabitants share. It is a distinctive place, higher, cooler, and wilder than its famous neighbor, Napa Valley. Howell Mountain deserves to be remembered in words and photographs. Indeed, although these photographs can never capture the crashing of Linda Falls or the smell of pine needles warmed by the sun across the forest floor, the photographs ask each reader, each one of us, to imagine how Howell Mountain looked to those pioneers who chose to brave the steep and winding road to the summit. There were many of these mountaineers. The natural beauty of Howell Mountain has been the backdrop for intense human striving, from the hunter-gatherers of prehistoric times to the farmers, builders, educators, and other visionaries of the American era. Their successes have both enhanced and changed the natural beauty of the mountain. Through transition, growth, and even loss, Howell Mountain continues to cast a spell. Many of you are here today because you understand that spell or you would like to know more about it. So what I would like to do now is share with you some images from the book, if I can figure out how to do that. Something has changed here. Give me 1 second. Elena, are you here? For some reason, I no longer have my share button. What can I do?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna make
Oh.
you not a co-host and then make it again.
All right,
And
let's
see if
just
that does the trick.
try resetting. Perfect. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. All right, let me share with you.
Let me try one more time.
One more time. Oh, excellent. Okay, it says that I now can share. I would love to share with you all because I have some photographs right here. Here we go. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I wanted to start, as I told you in the beginning, I wanted to start with the WAPO. So I have a couple images here that are from the book. And now you get to see some things in color that you ordinarily would only see in black and white. So the reason why I've chosen these two photographs to kind of represent the era that came before European settlement is because the WAPO people had a camp here in Anguin. And if you have a chance to read the book, you will see that I have actually stories that were given to me by some people who live in Anguin. I'm going to go ahead and mention Art Westfall, who told me when he was young, and he is quite one of our elders, and I don't know how old he is, but he was here before World War II as a child. He said when he was a child, he would play near Sky Oaks Drive today. And there was a place where they said, oh, this depression in the ground, we call this the spot where the Indians were. And so there is a place in Anguin that people within living memory recall a physical presence of the WAPO people. So we know that the WAPO were here. These are the people who came before the settling of Napa Valley, and they have left their presence behind. Not only that, but there is also recorded evidence of Elvira Angwin. She had an encounter with a man who came walking into her sort of front yard. She lived in the center of what is today Anguin, and a man came walking into her front yard one day and said, "I grew up here." And she asked him, "Okay, what is it like?" And he said, this is good to visit. I must go now." And he walked away. So there is evidence of the Wapo people living in this area. And so we want to acknowledge that. The reason why the Wapo lived here is because, as far as we know, it was a wonderful place for them because of the creek that runs, Con Creek, that runs through Anguin. And the location had a lot of trees. I've included this picture of a Howell Mountain oak. Because the Wapo would turn the acorns of the oak into food. And there are acorn grinding stones that people find every time there is a strong rain. There are arrowheads and grinding stones that are turned up. And we also have grinding stones set into the rock here on Howell Mountain. So acknowledging the people who came before Edwin and Elvira Anguin, and who in fact overlapped with those for whom the place is named. Going back to the beginning of this early history of Howell Mountain, though, who are some of the first people who established a place here? Obviously, we have John Howell, who established a place. We have also one of the first institutions on the mountain would be what is today Santolina Hospital. So I've included a photograph here. You will see other photographs of the hospital in the book. This is a different view of the hospital. I thought that might be fun. So in 1878, the Santolina Hospital was established as the rural health retreat. So when people started to settle Howell Mountain, one of the things that drew them here were the same things that drew the Wapo. It was the trees, it was the land itself, and it was also just the environment. So in 1878, Merritt Kellogg established the Rural Health Retreat. Merritt Kellogg was a brother of John Harvey Kellogg, who had established the sanitarium in Berrien Springs, Michigan. He had also invented cornflakes. And this was sort of kind of an offshoot, a branch of that kind of thinking, of healthy thinking and healthy living. And so Howell Mountain is kind of a place where the spirit of healthy living took root in the early days. So this is one of the things that we know drew people to Howell Mountain. In the same way that we established a hospital, there were also many people who came to Howell Mountain because of the beautiful environment, the healthy living, the clean air, the clear air, and the Mediterranean climate, but not because they were sick. So the hospital was established for those who maybe were drawn by their need for health, but we also have many health resorts that were established on Howell Mountain. So knowing about the town of Anguin tells us that there was a health resort in Anguin. This was not the only health resort. There were many health resorts in Howell Mountain. And so I want to talk a little bit about Anguin's, which was one that we know because there's a town named after it, but there were many other health resorts as well. So Anguin's is probably the first health resort that was established on Howell Mountain, because Anguin Edwin Angwin and Elvira Angwin purchased their land in 1874. There were other health resorts that were established at other places on the mountain shortly after. One, for example, would be at the corner of what is Deer Park and Old Howell Mountain Road and White Cottages. This was called Toland House. There's also White Cottages Resort, for which White Cottage Road is named. And there's also Woodworth's, which was established on the northeast side of the mountain, facing toward Pope Valley. So this is sort of a period between the 1880s and probably the 1920s when there were many health resorts on Howell Mountain. This is the same period in which Soda Springs in Napa Valley and also Etna Springs in Pope Valley would have been in their heyday. So Howell Mountain was a place where there was a large presence of resorts, and people from the Bay Area were drawn to Howell Mountain because of the clear air and the good weather, and how well it would help them in their desire to be healthy and to eat well. I have another picture for you here. One of the things that they left behind were names that they established as they stayed here. So one place that you've probably heard of is the Window Tree. If you have encountered any history in Anguin at all prior to probably the last 15 years, you may have heard the words Window Tree. This is a place that was in Mill Valley, where you can go hiking on trails today in the Pacific Union College forest. And there was a tree that everyone knew very well, had an established name, and people would visit it even during the time of Anguin's resort. I wanted to share with you this picture. So this is from the Santolina Sanitarium. This photograph appears in the book, and it was included because it is very evocative for today. The fact that the Spanish flu did make an impact on Howell Mountain. So some of the ways that the Spanish flu affected Howell Mountain, the way that our current pandemic does too. The hospital itself took care of Spanish flu patients, of course, and Pacific Union College as well was experiencing the Spanish flu and took very good care of its students, and no one died. We do know that the hospital took very good care of people as well. And one of the things that I report in the book is what the Calistoga newspaper recommended as a very good health treatment for those who were suffering from the Spanish flu. And the cure, according to them, was to eat a lot of onions. So I'm not sure if we should try that today, but that was an idea. Oop, let me go back. So some of the photographs I wanted to share with you are things that are new, and some are things that you might recognize. If you are from Howell Mountain at all, you will recognize the Chevron Station here in Anguin. This is a building that still exists today. And this particular image of the station, you can kind of picture if you were to stand at the corner across from the Chevron Station, you could see this today. You would just see a few things have changed. One thing that we no longer have, but we still have the building, that would be the Anguin soda fountain. This photograph is from 1960. The building where the soda fountain was in downtown Anguin, along the main strip that runs through town, this building is still there, but now you would find preferred images, the copy center, and mail room, different sorts of businesses, but not a soda fountain anymore. A story I would like to share with you about the soda fountain is that in the 1930s, some people were concerned that too many college students would go to the soda fountain and would drink milkshakes instead of eating proper meals. They were so concerned that they wrote letters to the college president at Pacific Union College in Anguin saying, too many students in Anguin are just drinking milkshakes for meals. And he had to step in and tell everyone what to do. Another photograph to share with you. This is, I believe, Buzzard's Roost. So if you've looked at the cover of the book, it has a picture of what is certainly overhanging rock. One of the things about Howell Mountain that has always been the same throughout all time is how the people who have lived here have enjoyed this space and how they have interacted with nature. One of the ways that they have interacted with nature over time is by going for hikes. And there have been a number of very important locations that people have hiked to over time. One of them being Buzzard's Roost, which we can still hike to today. It overlooks Pope Valley. Another would be Overhanging Rock, which is the cover of the book. This overlooks Napa Valley. And we also have Inspiration Point, which you can still access through the PUC forest today to overlook Pope Valley from a different direction, and Childs Valley, I believe, as well. So people who lived in Anguin have always gone out into nature and gone looking for these vistas that are important. All right, so I think that is the last photograph that's going to load. So I'm going to call that quits for showing you photographs. I have thrown a lot of information at you. I would love to answer questions and just talk about Anguin and Howell Mountain. If you have had a chance to look at the book, or if you haven't, any questions that you have, I am clearly nervous, but I love this topic and I would love to talk about it with you.
Okay, folks, so we don't have any questions in the chat box yet, though we do have some lovely compliments. So Catherine, if you get a chance, you should check those out.
I will appreciate that.
So feel free, you can, I would say at this point, since we don't have any questions in the chat box, if anybody wants to, oh, there we go, they're starting. Okay, yay. Matt is wondering how many maps of Howell Mountain and Anguin exist?
Ooh. That's a great question. I don't know exactly the number of maps that exist, but I know there is one from, I'm going to say 1924. That is my favorite. I know it's from the 20s. It was hand drawn by Harold Clark, who lived in Anguin. He worked for Pacific Union College in the biology department, and he hand drew a map of Anguin in the 20s that includes things like the Inspiration Point and Overhanging Rock, and also different caves that he found, mud caves, and places where indigenous people had left behind artifacts. So it's not just a map of the mountain, it's not just a map of the town, but it's also a map of what is left behind and what is the physical location. It's a beautiful map. So I know there are a number of maps that exist. Some of them would be US Geological Survey maps, very beautiful, and I've seen some, they're lovely. But probably my favorite is the hand-drawn map from the 20s.
Thank you. We have a question from Andrea, who's curious about if there's any information regarding Four Corners. They live there and would love stories about that location.
Oh, Four Corners. What a wonderful thing. I know that some of the old timers, and I say old timers in that like they were here like around the turn of the century, they would call it Windy Gap. So you need to tell me, because their reasoning was that the wind would come whistling through Four Corners at such a rate that they had to call it Windy Gap. So tell me if that's accurate. But the story of Four Corners that's where Toland House was located. So it's one of the resorts on Howell Mountain. And it was, so as you're coming up the mountain, you have the turn to the right to go on Old Howell Mountain Road, turn to the right, to the left to go on White Cottages, and continue forward onto regular Howell Mountain. And when you go just beyond Four Corners, that is where on the right-hand side, overlooking where Lake Hennessy is now, that's where Toland House would be. So if you look in the book, you can see pictures of it, and I can only imagine the beautiful view that they had. So that's just what I know right off the top of my head about Four Corners.
Thank you. We have a question from Shannon. What is the plan for more digitization? The fires have made us all painfully aware of how quickly such treasures as PUC's 20,000 photos can vanish.
That is a really good question. So we continue digitizing all the time. It's a long-term project. So we are continuing the project, and the long-term goal is to have digitized all of the physical actual prints that we have in the collection. And I am very invested in collaborating with others to share what we have. And so we've started doing that a little bit, as much as we can, to make sure that others can have access to what we have, and we can have sort of backups. And we're doing that with our servers, and we're doing the best we can, because you're absolutely right. And one of the framing devices of this book, like the way that I looked at the history of Anguin and Howell Mountain, because there was no other way to look at it, was looking through the lens of the land and environment and nature. And part of that is obviously fire. And there was a big fire in 1931, came up the backside of Howell Mountain, and it did not come any further because people from Santolina and Angwin and the rest of the mountain all came together and fought the fire together. And this is before Cal Fire. So the stories that we have of it are written by a state forester who happened to be the one assigned to the job. So this is something that we've been thinking about. And by we, I mean people on the mountain, people in Napa Valley. We've been thinking about this for a long time. So it's certainly important for the collections and for the history of this place.
We have a lovely compliment from Sylvia, who's looking forward to getting into the book. And then Cody has a question. What was the most surprising thing you learned while doing your research?
Most surprising. What a good question. I would say, okay, so the most surprising thing that I have learned about Howell Mountain is that we have lava tubes. And you might not think that, because as far as I know, they are not lava tubes that you could walk through. So we know that this area is a very volcanic land, and that's why the ground is the way it is. We know that Mount Santolina is, a volcanic rock. So Howell Mountain is also volcanic, and like the land is volcanic. People in the past believed perhaps Howell Mountain was a volcano that had gone dormant, but geology has not really borne that out. What we do know is that the land itself is a volcanic rock. And we know for a fact that in Anguin, there was a building project about 20 years ago, perhaps, maybe more. I'm gonna go ahead and say more, probably 30 years ago, maybe 40 even. This is Chanshan Hall, for those who are in the know, and I can no longer remember when that was built. It was in the 80s, I believe they finished it. I can't remember the exact date. So we're looking at 30 to 40 years. And as they were building this building on the campus of Pacific Union College, they discovered a lava tube in the place that would be the foundation, and it had to be filled with cement so that they could build this building. So this is something that I had never heard about, and I did not even think about it because we don't think of this area as active volcanically. I don't think about the volcanic nature of the land. I found that fascinating.
That is totally fascinating. I had no idea either.
I know, right?
I love that. Ashley is wondering if you can elaborate a little more on the native people who lived here, particularly the winter village that you describe in your book and
Oh, yeah.
where that is.
Sure, absolutely. So if you come up into Anguin, so if you come up Howell Mountain and enter Anguin through Cuyahoga Pass, you will have Con Creek on the left, and you will have Linda Falls is on your right and behind you a little bit once you come through the pass. And there along Con Creek, this is a place where the Wapo lived. We know this because of the marks that they've left behind. So one of the things that they left behind are grinding stones in the bedrock surrounding the creek. Another thing that we know is that there was a location a little bit further up the hill from the creek, and that would be Sky Oaks Drive now today. And this is a place where there was a depression in the earth just prior to World War II. This is what I talked about before. Another thing that we know, and I have yet to figure out where this was. There was a place where the indigenous people had a burial ground on Howell Mountain. And I know about it because students at Pacific Union College in the 1920s went hiking, and they had a place that they would mark as the Indian graveyard, they called it. And so in the student newspaper, they would report about their trips hiking to what they called the Indian graveyard. So we know they had left behind a place where they had lived and also where they had buried their dead. I don't know where that location is. I still need to find out, but it's something to learn. And I know that many people have done really good archaeological work on Howell Mountain, and they have also found evidence of grinding stones and artifacts. And that's where the story of where Elvira Angwin interacted with a person who was a member of the Wapo originally, and he had lived in Anguin area. He came and met with her, and she told the story to an anthropologist who had come to do some digs in the early 1880s. So that's how we know that the Wapo were here. That's one of the ways that we know.
Thank you. So in order to ask a couple of questions, I'm going to need some pronunciation help, because
I can help.
this word,
Okay.
apparently all of you know what it is, and I don't know what it is. So Caiocca?
I would say Cuyahoga. Am I wrong?
Cuyahoga?
I would say
I have the
Cuyahoga.
foggiest. Cuyahoga. Somebody's nodding. Thank you, Susan. Okay. Cuyahoga.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Sylvia is curious if you have information about the Cuyahoga place name.
Ooh. Okay. So I think his name was Jay Cuyahoga. Oof. Please don't quote me on that. I can't look it up right now because my phone's not here and I don't want to leave this page. But it's named for a person who worked for Napa County. Julius, thank you. Julius Cuyahoga, thank you, County Supervisor. Exactly. So somebody in the comments knew exactly, but I would remember that it was someone who worked for Napa County, and this was a person, Julius Cuyahoga. I know that he was very supportive of Anguin, and I believe he was present perhaps when the current road that runs through town was opened, or at least he was supportive of the town. At the very least, he made a big impact, and so they named the pass for him when the road was opened. And the road previously did not run through that pass. Instead, it ran. If you come into Anguin, you'll see like a little side road that goes off, and it says only bicycles, and it goes toward Linda Falls. That was part of the original road that was rebuilt in a way that was much happier for cars, but you can still kind of walk portions of the old road today. And you can see one of those old bridges from the 1880s. In fact, it was there when Anguin's resort was there. You can see that bridge, which is buried under Cuyahoga Pass, named for Julius Cuyahoga.
So I think that mostly answers then Ashley's question of why Cuyahoga Pass was filled in. It sounds like it was not great for cars, and that's why.
Yeah, so if you go on that side road, it's very twisty and very narrow, and they were trying to make the entire road up the mountain much safer. So the road prior to the 1930s, not paved at all. If you can believe it, before the 1930s, no paved road up the mountain, and it was so steep, so twisty, and so dusty. And like you can imagine, if you've been in California in the summer, it is very dry. And if you've been in California in the winter, it is very wet. And so the mountain road was extremely dangerous and hard to travel for most of its history. It's only been since the 1930s that we've had any kind of pavement whatsoever. And that wasn't even consistent pavement at that point. That was just the beginning of paving. So Cuyahoga Pass was part of that improvement. And I believe it was 1949 when they finally rearranged the road that ran through Angwin. I have to refer to my own book to figure out when things happened. I believe it was 1949 though. Yeah, I can't figure it out. Let's see here. Yeah, 1949, October 13. And that was when they rearranged the road that ran through Anguin as well, because prior to that, the road ran through the middle of Pacific Union College and it was pretty dangerous for the students. So much better solution. Very slow process of improving the roads.
Got it. So Matt's question is also about roads. He's curious about the toll roads that used to run through Angwin. Whether
Ooh,
you know anything about that.
that is a really good question. I don't know about tolls. I don't know about toll roads. What I do know is about the sort of kind of a business transaction that Edwin and Elvira Anguin did with the stagecoach company. So if you look at the book, there is a map that shows how stages and railroads and steamships would get from San Francisco to Howell Mountain to go to different health resorts on the mountain. One of the things that we know is that Edwin and Elvira Anguin worked out a deal with the stagecoach company, and you can see it in advertisements in the Santolina Star. They would say, "Oh, on your way to Etna Springs," which was always the most famous of the resorts in this part of Napa County. "Oh, are you on your way to Etna Springs? Well, don't worry, you're going to have a stop at Anguin's Resort for lunch." So they worked this out that every stagecoach would stop at Anguin's for lunch, regardless of whether or not you stayed there. So that's what I do know about. I don't know about the tolls. I'll have to find out.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Bonnie is curious about the Adventist influence.
Sure. Yeah. So the Seventh day Adventist Church was involved in the establishment of the Rural Health Retreat in 1878. That's what became the St. Helena Sanitarium and later the St. Helena Hospital. Just a kind of like across like the valley. So you go down the slope of the hill and there's like that valley. It comes up toward Glass Mountain. We're all very familiar with Glass Mountain this year, particularly. In that valley, there's a building called Elmshaven. That's where the prophet of the Adventist Church lived. That's Ellen White. That's her home is now a nationally registered historic site. And then at Pacific Union College, the Adventist Church is involved in that school. That's an Adventist school. So that would be kind of like 3 points of intersection with the Seventh day Adventist Church. And I would say that if you want to kind of characterize the influence of the church and its sort of lifestyle and beliefs, you can see that in the market in Anguin. If anyone has ever been there, it is a fully vegetarian market. So that's one of the things you will see a kind of as it affects the people who live there who are not a part of Pacific Union College, but are inhabitants of Anguin, residents of Howell Mountain. They shop at their local market and it is all vegetarian and there's no alcohol. It's just really good food and good prices, honestly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Tim lives on White Cottage Road in a
Yeah.
house built in 1870, which is amazing, Tim,
Ah,
and wants to know how he can research the history of that time period.
ooh, the 1870s. Oh, very cool. So, what we have at Pacific Union College, we have a good report that was written by a student in the 1970s where she researched and like spoke to people who had established or who were not they had not established people who were associated with wineries that had been established at that point. So that is one of the things that we have history of are wineries or vineyards or like those really old buildings. Like if you drive down White Cottage and you continue around, like there's like a sweeping bend and it used to be Ladera and now it's something else. We have histories of these really old winery buildings. So that's one thing that we know about this place is the history of the businesses that were here. Other than that, I know because of what the businesses were doing that there were Italian and Chinese immigrants living in the area. So we could start there and we can move from there into county surveys and census records and old maps. The really old maps will often show who owned what parcel of land. And this is how you can figure out perhaps not the history of your house, maybe the history of your house, but if not that, certainly the history of the land.
That's awesome. I love that the richness of the resources. Diane is curious if you have plans for another book, possibly about the great history of the college, the dairy, the airport, the farm, etc., or even the hospital.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So, the idea right now is that maybe we can do something about Deer Park because Deer Park as a community is the place surrounding the hospital. It's near Glass Mountain. It's near Elms Haven. These are places that are important, of course, but a lot of that area is important and all of it has generated history and specific photographs and stories about the people who lived there. And especially after the Glass Mountain fires last year, this is an area that it would be important to capture the history of the community. So if any of you happen to have connections to Deer Park in some way or photographs or stories. I mean, I want to hear your stories about Anguin as well, but that's sort of the next step I'm thinking is what can PUC do? What can the collections at Pacific Union College do to capture the history of our neighbors who have been connected with the area? So like PUC has such rich collections because it has been connected to its neighbor and its communities for decades. And so that's where Deer Park comes in. Can we tell their story and bring in what they have as well as we tell it? So that's kind of the idea. Let's see how far we get.
And we'll probably have an event for that if and when it comes out.
That'd be great.
So I've got like 4 more questions in the chat box and we're coming up on an hour. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off after those questions for everybody.
Okay.
But if people still have questions, I'm sure we can get them to Catherine as well.
Oh
So
yeah, I've finally warmed up, so please.
for those last few questions, so are there any images that you wanted to include but did not have room for and wish you could
Oh
have?
my word, that is such a good question. Okay, so just a couple of weeks ago, I no longer remember where or how, but I found photographs of a baseball game being played right off of, it would be off of Cold Springs Road today. And it was Pacific Union College students and faculty and staff playing a baseball game, and it's really good. So if you don't already follow PUC Archives on Twitter, I did share it there because if I couldn't put it in the book, I'm going to put it somewhere. But it's really great because there's somebody going safe as a guy slides into home. Oh man, I wish we'd had that in the book.
So that was PUC Archives on Twitter.
Yeah,
So
I
follow
think it's
that if
at
you're into it.
PUC Archives. Yeah.
Jennifer is curious, was Old Howell Mountain the original road up the hill, and when was Deer Park Road added, if you know?
Ooh, man. Okay, so that's a good one. The road up the hill. So Deer Park Road, parts of it, like if you go up Sanitarium, that is an original road. Sanitarium, I can speak to for sure. And then the road as it goes past, as it goes, it goes through Deer Park and it goes past the Foothills School. That part of it burned in the glass fire. That road is certainly original. But then from the intersection of the two, where it goes up and around the hairpin turn, I'm not sure anymore. What I do know is that around 1916, I believe, Pacific Union College and the hospital like collaborated to work on the road and make it better. So it was certainly like an issue for people at the top of the mountain and people midway up. How do we work together to make this road better? Because it was so bad. And then obviously it did come to Four Corners. So the Four Corners, which is today Old Howell Mountain, and Deer Park, that's an original intersection. But without knowing for sure, I won't promise you the hairpin has always been there. But I can promise that the road did come through Four Corners, and then it had a very different route to get to Anguin, and then leaving Anguin, it had a somewhat different route. And this I know prior to 1949 when they built the road as we know it today. So it's changed a bit. And one of my favorite things in the whole world, because I'm such a nerd, is old roads. So if you come to Anguin today, as you drive through Anguin, you can kind of get a feel for where the road used to be. And I think that's a lot of fun.
Ashley loves your book, and so did her kids, which is awesome. Jennifer has another question. Please discuss the agricultural influence of the college in the 50s to the 80s, and why did they, if you know why they stopped that focus.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. So that's great. The college was always very involved in agriculture and has had agricultural fields going since 1909, and they had inherited, so Pacific Union College inherited what Edwin and Elvira Anguin had going in their ranch. So if you drive through the middle of Anguin and you see big fields on your left and the college on the right, the fields on the left were always they were always agricultural, and on the right where the college is now, there were big, like there was like a plum orchard and pumpkin patch, and I think there's some pictures of it in the book, and there are others I could show you if you ever asked. The college has always had a foot in the agriculture game. So around 1986, there was a surplus of milk in the United States, and the government actually begged dairies to shut down so that they could save the dairy industry. And that's the reason why Pacific Union College closed its dairy, was because the government said, oh, please, please, please. And so now if you read the book, you'll also see kind of a report about what the college is doing to kind of turn in a different direction and like come back to agriculture. And now that it's not going to do anybody some harm, now let's turn back and let's do farm to table and do organic, local stuff. And so that's what I think Angwin has been doing. And it's not just the college, it's also the Helmers, who have a local business, and it's also the market in Anguin. So it's a very local kind of act to return to the land.
What a fascinating bit of history. Okay, last couple questions. First from David. I know there were more students in the 80s at PUC. Has the population also changed over the years in Anguin?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so one of the things about Angwin is that it's a really beautiful place. And so Howell Mountain is just beautiful in general. So Howell Mountain and Angwin have attracted more people from the Bay Area in the last 20 or 30 years. More people from the Bay Area have come and established second homes. That's new. If you look back at the history of the mountain, we've got all these health resorts. We have Woodsworths and we have white cottages and whatever. Anguins, of course, this is where the Bay Area rich would come and celebrate for a summer and stay. But now we don't have these resorts. So instead, folks will buy homes. So that has changed a little, but we see that across the US. That's nothing new. So that has certainly affected the sort of like the dynamics of the mountain in a way that I want to look on the positive side. They're coming here because they love it and it's beautiful. And other than that, sure, yeah. In the 80s, we had what was going on with the baby boom, right? So yeah, there were a lot of students at PUC. And one thing we can say about that era, there were too many. There were students that were like 3 and 4 to a dorm room. It's better now. They don't have to double up like that or triple or quadruple up.
Okay, and our last question, which is a fun one. Christy has heard rumors that the PUC elementary gym was originally a bowling alley and was moved to its current location later on. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, that's great. Right. So the PUC elementary school, the building there was a part of the very first building boom at the college. So initially, when the college came to Anguin, they put the elementary school in the old dance hall, which was also the bowling alley, and it was also I can't remember, like a sort of a auditorium you would gather in, right? So they turned this old resort building into an elementary school, but then after time, it started to kind of get run down. So in the same place where that had been, they took down the old bowling alley dance hall and they built what they called the normal department, which is such a funny name for education. It was called normal school and normal department instead of elementary. And so that exact building, which was built in the 1910s, was chopped in half and then moved with with an 18-wheeler. It was moved through Anguin and around the corner up Cold Springs to where it exists today. So if you look at old pictures, it's not the very first building that was there, but it's the second one, which came very close after Anguin and his wife sold the resort.
Awesome. Well, what a wealth of knowledge you are. There's a bunch of people saying thank you in the comment in the chat box, and I echo that as well. We do have plenty of copies at the shop in St. Helena, Main Street Book Mine, and Napa Book Mine on Pearl Street in Napa. So hopefully people will come on in and pick up a copy, support your local authors, support your local bookstore. Any last words before we head out? You're good, Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, so I had mentioned at PUC Archives, and I think I said Twitter, but it's actually Instagram. On Twitter and Facebook, it's PUC Library. So either way, if you go looking for PUC on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you will find something good where we share stuff. And I am happy to answer more questions. I feel like there's just way too much, and I don't know, I want to talk about it all the time. So please contact me directly if you have any questions or want to know more.
Or just want to chat.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Katharine Van Arsdale Bell for this wonderful book and for taking the time tonight to speak with us all. Thank you all for joining us. It's so good to hear you, see you, and we really appreciate it. Again, lots of copies in the store, so come on by, pick up a copy, and get learning about our local environment and our local history. So thank you all. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.